This video may be a little dry for you, but this is my race recap of the 2023 Boston Marathon. Yeah, I was number 9736. I was wave 2 in the second corral, and my wave left the corral at 10:25 in the morning. Now, the first wave left at 10 o'clock in the morning, so I was 25 minutes behind the first wave. But I'm getting ahead of myself because my weekend didn't start actually with the race. The race was where the weekend ended, but there's just a couple things that I wanted to tell you about my trip up to Boston and then leading up to the marathon that may be interesting. I don't have a lot of footage, I don't have a lot of B-roll of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, so just bear with me while I try and explain it to you. So I left to go up to Boston. I live in Florida. I left to go up to Boston on Friday before the race. The race is on Monday. And Thursday night at about 5 o'clock, I got an email from JetBlue saying that my flight had been cancelled. It was very stressful. I don't know why JetBlue did it this way, because like an hour later, they said, hey, we've actually just changed your flight number and the plane. Your flight details are all the same. Of course, this is stress that I really don't need before a race. Okay, so a lot of people, when they go up to Boston, they don't know anyone there, so they stay in hotels in the city, and then they can just walk around and do everything. I have family up there. My mum actually lives just north of Boston. So when I arrived at Boston on Friday, I went straight to my mum's house, and then on Saturday, I drove into the city and I went to the Tracksmith Shakeout Run, and that was a good time. Now, I've already put out a video about my Tracksmith Shakeout Run, so if you want to see that, I will link to it in the show notes below, or just go back. It's easy to find. It was just a couple videos ago. After the Tracksmith Shakeout Run, I went to the expo, I picked up my packet, I then had to hustle to get to another part of town where I was doing a Puma Shakeout Run. But that was totally worth the hustle. I ran down there. I only ran 1.5 miles. At that Shakeout Run, it was about 3.5 miles for the first Shakeout Run, so I was in good shape. On Sunday, I just hung out with my mum. It was a nice, relaxing day. I chose not to run the day before the marathon at this race. Usually I will definitely go out and I will run the day before the marathon, just a couple miles to get your legs shaken out. But this time I figured I did enough on Saturday. I think it was a good decision. I was pretty happy. I was happy that I felt rested going into the race, and I didn't actually feel like I needed a shakeout run on Sunday because I was so well shaken out on Saturday, you know what I mean? Okay, so moving on to race day. Race day, again, I am very lucky to have my mum up near Boston because it means I get to sleep in on race morning. Got to wake up without an alarm, and then I got a lift to Hopkinton, so I didn't have to sit on those school buses for, I don't know how long it is. It probably takes an hour to get from Boston to Hopkinton on the school bus, but I did get on a school bus. It's just like a 10-minute ride from just outside of the Hopkinton Town Center into the Hopkinton Town Center because the whole town is locked down for the marathon. Now, getting a ride to Hopkinton is not all puppies and candy floss. There was a downside, but we'll get to that downside in a few minutes at the end of the video. But now I'm in Hopkinton, I'm excited. I actually feel pretty good. The weather was quite perfect. It was chilly, but not too chilly. There was a light drizzle. It wasn't a bad rain at all. I knew my goals. I think my goals were perfectly in reach. I fully expected to run my A goal, and I had a different race strategy this time. I was really going to try to start the race very conservatively. I was not going to go out the gate too fast. 2023 was actually the 8th time that I've run the Boston Marathon, and I think every other time I have gone out too fast. Like, I refuse to learn that lesson. But I'm happy to say that I did learn that lesson this year, and I actually ran the first 10K actually quite conservatively. I was feeling pretty good after it. I didn't feel like I went out too fast. So I think it's time to put some race data on the screen so we can actually dig into my race and how it went, what it felt like, and all that stuff. There it is, the 127th Boston Marathon. Now, the first thing I want you to look at is the distance. The distance recorded was 26.59 miles. Now, I recorded this run that's on my Strava using my Chorus Apex 2 Pro. I also ran using the Apple Watch Ultra, and interestingly, the Apple Watch Ultra recorded 26.25 miles. So it was a lot more accurate over the entire marathon than the Chorus Apex 2 Pro. But I know that I didn't run exactly as the course is measured. Like, with the number of people on the course, it's almost impossible to run on the exact line that is measured. So even though the Apple Watch Ultra measured 26.25, I think probably the Apex 2 Pro measuring 26.59 was probably a little more accurate. Of course, it's impossible to see. My watch recorded my race at 3 hours, 15 minutes and 16 seconds. However, my official time was 3 hours, 15 minutes and 9 seconds. And I knocked out the race at an average pace of 7:21. But there's a lot more to a marathon than just the average pace, especially at Boston when there's some hills involved. So let's switch over to my race analysis, and this gives a good snapshot of every mile split. Look at this first mile. We've got a 7:17 average. Now, honestly, I was holding back here, but I was being held back more than I would have held back if I was running alone. There was a lot of people. It was very hard to even move forward at that pace. But honestly, that's probably a good thing because I was able to speed up in the next couple miles. We can see mile 2, 7 minutes, mile 3 also 7 minutes, mile 4, a 6:50, back down to a 7:11, 7:05 for mile 6. Look, I am actually very happy with how that first 10K went. In just a minute, when we talk about the overall thing, I think maybe I could have gone out a little faster in the beginning. I think perhaps I was holding back just a little too much at the beginning of the race. But at the time we don't know. We're always told to hold back. It's only in hindsight when I can look at my race as a whole and think, you know, I probably could have sped up a few seconds in those beginning miles when just things were going easy, you know what I mean? But also, looking back, if I had sped up 10 or 15 seconds a mile, which I thought would be totally within my capabilities, maybe that would have just cashed me so much that I wouldn't have been able to run as hard as I did on the uphills or when I was getting tired towards the end of the race. Luckily, we'll never know, so I don't have to lose any sleep over it. And then I want you to see just the 5K splits. So we can see my first 5K was 22:04, second sped up just a little bit, 21:52, third 5K, still not losing too much time, 22:06. Even we're getting to the fourth 5K at 22:30. That's not too bad. I ran a very controlled first half of the race. And I've got to say, the first half of the race, like, it wasn't even noticeable. I've run some marathons where I got to the halfway point and I felt like crap. Like, it was very difficult for me to even comprehend that I had to run another half marathon. That wasn't the case with this video. In fact, if you watch my race video, you know that I didn't mention kind of feeling bad, feeling like I was putting the work in until I got to 17.5 miles, which it ain't easy. It ain't easy. It's actually pretty normal in a marathon to start feeling bad at 17.5 miles. Now, when we're looking at my Strava mile splits, it's pretty easy to see where the hills started and where I started to fall back just a little bit. Look at this downhill right here. This is a beautiful downhill. I mean, beautiful in that you start moving a little quicker. Not beautiful in that your quads really start to get trashed, but this is mile 16. This is Newton. This is where the Newton hills start, and then these are the Newton hills, and we just gradually peak up to here, which is the top of Heartbreak Hill. Hi, that was the top of Heartbreak Hill, right behind us. And yes, my pace did drop in the hills, which is totally to be expected. And I am going to be doing a little comparison in just a minute with some of the top runners, so you can see just how normal it is to drop the pace. Then we can see this increase. My gosh, the pace just goes through the roof, and through the roof is relative. It's only compared with mile 21 that mile 22 seems like the pace went through the roof. But this is the downside of Heartbreak Hill. It is just relief to not be running uphill at this point. But I was feeling pretty tired at the top of Heartbreak Hill, and a 7:24 I think was about as fast as I could run. Slowed down a little after that, 7:34, and then I kind of maintained to the finish. It looks like this last 0.6 picked it up to 7:21. Yeah, not bad. Can't complain. I mean, I was pretty thrashed at that point. But a lot of you were saying on the race vlog video that perhaps you thought I might be disappointed with my time, and I'm not disappointed with my time at all. I think looking at this, it's not as bad as perhaps it felt when I was in it. And I know that I put in the effort that I guess I can be proud of. Like, I ran hard. I don't think I could have run much faster except in the beginning. Now let's just switch over to Stride, because Stride was a little foot pod that I had on the front of my shoe. Stride was suggesting that I run the marathon at an average of 318 watts. And you can see right here that my average watt output was 323. In my mind, I was trying to keep it right around 320. That is this yellow line on this chart. And we can see there's a lot of oscillation as it goes along, but if you look at the whole macro marathon, it seems pretty consistent. I am actually quite happy about how I kept the power, because I was only looking at my watch going on the uphill, so I was only using the power number during the uphill. So because I wasn't just totally on top of that number the whole time, I'm actually quite pleased with how my average power turned out. Now we do see this line, this white line right across the top. This does indicate that my power output was slightly dropping in the last quarter of the race, which again is to be expected because I'm getting tired. But overall, very happy with my power output. Let's just switch over to something else. Let's go to Chorus. This Chorus chart, it looks like this Chorus chart is an absolute mess. So right now you are looking at my heart rate, my pace, and my power all overlaid. Let's eliminate some of these things so we can actually see. right now you are looking at just my heart rate. And this is something else that I'm quite pleased at. Now, of course, I didn't know it at the time. I'm not aware of like my entire heart rate over the race while I'm running. It is one of the variables I have on my watch, so I am kind of looking at it once in a while. But what I'm happy to see is that the level of cardiac drift is very minimal. And this indicates to me that I was running at quite a controlled effort. Now, clearly you can see this just as well as I can. There certainly is cardiac drift from the beginning to the end, especially, let's see, these would have been the hills from about here on. We can see there is like an increase in my heart rate right about here, and then it looks like it drops as it drops down as I'm coming down Heartbreak Hill, and then it peaks again. I know that there's only a 10K left, so I'm kind of kicking the effort just a little bit in order to make it in. I think that is where, from like here on, that is where my heart rate kind of peaks just a little bit. But we can see I'm right around 177. That's pretty high for me, all right? If my max heart rate, I don't know, if I had to guess, I'd say it's around 185. I don't do a lot of max heart rate efforts, but if I had to estimate, around 185 is where my max is. And I'm certainly up at that upper end. This effort is not sustainable over the long term. I've got to say, I'm not unhappy. I'm not unhappy. At the end of a marathon, that is where it's time to leave it on the table. I felt like, especially with a heart rate like that, I was actually giving it pretty much everything I had at that point. All right, so let's just do a little comparison. Let's compare my effort with some other people that ran the Boston Marathon. And I think this is a good way to show you the course, show you how the course affects different people. And ultimately what I'm showing you is that I didn't run a really bad race. And I just want to prove it to you by showing you how some other people ran the race. And you can see that I have a couple of runners on the screen right now. We've got Eliud Kipchoge right at the top, Evans Chebet. Okay, but let's just look at some of these runners and see how their race performed compared to mine. And this is a great feature of the BAA racing app. So if you did run the race, you can compare your effort to anyone's effort that you want. But let's look at Evans Chebet because he ran the race second year in a row. So it's going to be interesting to see how this Boston Marathon champion handles the race. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see he finished in 2:05:54, and then there's this little toggle on the bottom. Compare your race stats with Evans Chebet. Let's hit that, shall we? And this is what we get. Clearly, this guy is a lot faster than me, right? Clearly, he is running substantially faster. Let's just leave it at that. But I want you to look at the trend line of the graph of his paces. It's actually very similar to mine. He ran a little more consistent in that first 21 miles. We can see with mine from about mile 15 to 20, my pace dropped a little bit before I hit the hills, and then it dropped substantially. But our race graph is trending in the same direction. Right? Isn't this refreshing? So let me go back. Let's look at Scott Fauble. Scott Fauble was the first American man to finish the race. He finished in 2:09:44, blazing. And this one I wanted you to pay attention to because this is a little different than mine. I am clearly more of an Evans Chebet kind of runner, but Scott ran very consistently. Now there were a couple of peaks, but not really valleys. So you can see that in the Newton Hills, Scott Fauble really didn't suffer too much. He sped up just a little bit more on the downside than he did before going up the hill. So he ran consistently to the hills and then he sped up on the downside. Let's go back and let's look at Hellen Obiri. Hellen Obiri, champion, Boston Marathon champion, finished in 2:21:38. She ran a good race. Look at this race. This is what I wanted to show you. Hellen Obiri ran such a phenomenal race. I can't even say enough about it. Look how fast and how even she ran. And she still had time to kick it at the end. Look at that finishing kick, how it just goes through the roof. Now, I also have a finishing kick, but it came from a different place. My finishing kick started from a very slow speed. She was running at her normal marathon pace and then kicked it to the finish. I think Hellen Obiri has the best pace chart that I have seen yet. Let's just look at Emma Bates. First American female to finish the Boston Marathon, finishing in 2:22:10. Emma just ran a fantastic race again. Look at Emma Bates's pace chart. Can you believe it? It's almost on Obiri's level, except that finishing kick isn't as much, but look how consistent Emma Bates was across the entire race. And then once she gets to the top of Heartbreak Hill, that's when she kicks it into gear. This is the mark of a true marathon expert. Emma Bates crush this race. I could look at this just all day long. I think this is such a beautiful pace chart, but let's also look at Kipchoge. We're not going to leave Kipchoge out. A 6th place finish at the Boston Marathon is pretty admirable. He finished in 2:09:23. Let's just compare his to mine. And we're going to see that it was not Kipchoge's day. He was running very good in the first part of the race, coming up to the Newton Hills, and then his pace really dropped coming into the Newton Hills, but then his pace really didn't recover coming out of the Newton Hills, and I guess that's really what shows that it wasn't his day when you compare him to some other professional athletes. But those are the professional athletes compared to me. Of course, they run a little bit quicker, but all in all, the professional athletes make me feel pretty good about myself, except for Obiri and Bates. Those women are just on another level. I cannot believe how consistent they ran. So a lot of you have been asking how the Endorphin Elite treated me. It treated me very well. So very early on in the race, somebody splashed in a big puddle right next to me and soaked my right foot. I was a little worried, but it turned out to be not necessary to worry because the shoes felt good for the entire race. I didn't have any issues. They felt responsive. They kind of disappeared on my foot, which is exactly what I want. And I will be running another marathon in the Endorphin Elite. They were that good. I am glad I chose this over the Vaporfly 3 for this Boston Marathon. I do have a downside. Like, it's not everything good about the Endorphin Elite. I did wear these white Balega socks, and I don't know if you can see, but they are heavily stained. These just came out of the washing machine before I started filming, and yeah, they smell really good. They didn't smell so good after the race, but they are stained yellow from the Endorphin Elite. So if you do have the Endorphin Elite and you are running in the rain, maybe don't wear white socks, at least if you care about keeping your white socks white. When I finished the race, I crossed the finish line. That was always a lot of fun. I did get a little emotional. I don't always get emotional at the end of marathons. I've run quite a few marathons and I've only actually kind of got the feels at 5 or 6 of them. It's not common, and it really hit me hard this time. I think it's because, and this was after speaking to my wife Harmony, it was, I think, because of the weather, or at least she pointed out that in the past when she has run marathons and the weather has just been, I want to say horrible, but you know, let's just say not ideal, that is when you get more emotional. So yeah, I think that's probably the case. It was cold. I was probably cold for the last 10K of the race, and then once I finished, got the feels. It's a good feeling at the end of a marathon to have that emotional reaction. Picked up my medal, got my space blanket, and then I had to walk to the bus station, which was about 1.2 miles away, South Station, from the finish line, and that's when things really went downhill for me. I was so cold. I was noticeably shivering. I even called my wife on the walk to just to complain to someone. You know, I wanted to say, I told her, I don't think I'm going to make it. I made it to the finish line. I don't think I'm going to make it the mile to the bus station. But then as I was walking to the bus station, I ran into Kofuzi, which was totally random because 30,000 runners, we were the only 2 people on that part of the sidewalk, and he just nudged me and said, you know, hey. And then I walked with him for a little bit, and he was just as cold as I was. We were both effing miserable. And then I got to South Station, I went downstairs, I sat down, and I hadn't bought my bus ticket ahead of time, so of course I'm fumbling on my phone. My Mylar blanket is over my shoulders. I am visibly shaking. I had 3 people approach me and ask me if they can help me. Can they buy me a coffee? Like, I must have been a pretty sorry sight at that point in my life. Of course, I was like, no, I'm fine. Teeth chattering, hands shaking. I did get up, I made a coffee, which turned out to be the magic elixir that I needed to bring me back to life. But before I got the coffee and I was trying to dress it up, another kind lady came up to me and offered to help me. So she was able to open the Splenda, put it in, she poured the cream in, she stirred it for me, she put the lid back on. So all I had to do was stand by and shiver and then sip that delicious coffee. People are so kind. I'm almost surprised that so many people offered to help me when I was just, you know, a marathon runner shivering, but that sounds a little cynical. It's not that surprising. If you give people a chance to be nice, they will usually be nice. And then I got on the bus and went home, and unfortunately I had a 6 a.m. flight out of Logan the following day, which means I had to wake up at 2:30. But because I had filmed a video for the Boston Marathon, I actually spent most of the night editing, so I think I probably got about an hour and a half sleep before my flight. So the next day was pretty miserable. But that is another story. It's another story that I'm probably not going to tell. Actually, it's a pretty boring story. I was just really tired at the end. Guys, if you ran the Boston Marathon, I would love to hear how it went. If you've run other marathons and you've had similar experiences, why don't you let me know? If you've run other marathons and you've had a totally different experience, also let me know. And if you have made it to this point in the video, I gotta say, you're probably a real fan of my videos, because I don't know if I will even stay to the end of this video to edit it. But if you have made it to this point, why don't you drop the face with the Z's, the sleeping emoji, because I think just listening to me talk for this long about stats and numbers and Boston marathons and all the little stuff that goes into it, I think that's enough to put someone to sleep. But for now, be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.